Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Fantasy Friday. So, last week we left on another bit of a cliffhanger. The author's been doing that to us lately. So, when we read chapter 30, at the very end, Maniye awoke from a dream suddenly, and we weren't too sure exactly what happened. But there was screaming. So, we're going to have to check in with her again and see what actually happened, if we can find out at all. So let's dive right into it and start with chapter number 31. The bronze knife clattering to the ground at her feet was the loudest sound in the world. Many had slept poorly these last 2 nights. It was not the dreams, though. It was the sound of the wolf scout that the Eriemen had brought in. The priesthood were torturing him. The people of the tiger knew that gods were not of the world, above it and beyond it, things of pure spirit. That was why they would not commit the image of their deity to stone or metal or wood. Smoke, shadows, these were fit intermediaries through which to glimpse the spirit world. She had learned all of this, of course. She remembered carefully committing to memory that, for a soul to be prepared for the tiger, it must be brought to a height of spiritual awareness, drawn from the body until it was almost visible in the air. In her lessons, the logic of this had seemed unassailable. And there were different methods of arriving at such awareness. The year kings of the deer tribe had their every want sated until it was time for them to kneel at the altar. The wolves hunted their running deer to exhaustion. Drugs, deprivation, death at the point of physical exaltation. The gods could be reached in many ways. For the tiger, when it came to offer up its enemies, there was only one way. Fear and pain were the hammers they used to forge a fine sacrifice. And so the swiftback writhed and wailed deep inside the temple, his voice carried out to all, echoing his despair along the halls and the corridors. And, in the temple's heart, in the room of smoke and pierced stone, the tiger licked its insubstantial lips and waited. When he cried out, there was a distant echo deep within Maniye, the return call of her receding wolf soul. She hated it, yet it kept her awake. No matter how much she told herself that these were her ways now, still that lonely voice would not be silenced. And now this, the dancers and their knife. She had been up early, red-eyed, trailing towards her lessons, when 4 of the other girls had blocked her path. You, said one who stood in front of her like their leader. Maniye had looked her in the eye and groped for her name. Imshalma, or something like that. Tiger names were still strange to her. Maniye did not answer, merely waiting. She could sense the ill feeling amongst them, and yet they were nervous too. I understand you now, said Imshalma. I have touched you. All the days since you came I have watched. I have asked myself, what is this wolf they have brought among us? There must be a reason, I knew, but I could not see it. But now I understand you. Many had no sense that her relationship to the queen had become known to these girls, but plainly something had changed. I have seen our teachers watching you. I have seen the queen watching you. I know you, wolf girl. You are a test. Maniye's eyes narrowed. I am not a wolf. You are a test for us, to see if we possess the mind to be warriors. Our teachers have watched just to see if we would act against this enemy they have brought into our midst. They have been disappointed because we accepted you so meekly. The tiger is not meek. The tiger takes his prey without hesitation, without mercy. So I will take you. I will pass the test. That was when the daggers came out, one to stay in Imshalma's hand and one cast at Maniye's feet. Maniye weighed the girl's words, hunting for truth and finding not a trace of it. But there was another possibility. There might be a test after all. They are testing me, Maniye told the other girl. I am Tiger. but they doubt me, and I have been meek. As you say, the tiger is not meek. She picked up the dagger, noting an eddy of movement throughout the other girls. Imshalma's eyes were a little wider than before, and Many wondered if she had been expecting the test to be passed simply by making the challenge, perhaps thinking the wolf girl would flee when confronted with a blade. The shadow of the wolf clung to her, and it made them fear. Just as wolf children grew up on tales of the shadow eaters, so recent history had given these girls plenty of reasons to fear the wolf. She shifted her back foot, dropping her weight lower. Her left hand came up before her face, fingers crooked, whilst her right hand held the curved blade extended at waist level. The mantle of her lessons settled on her, and for once she felt each part of her in its proper place. If Aritchaka had come by just then, she would have found no fault at all. But the priesthood were not present to arbitrate. The other three girls had backed off to give Imshalma space, and it was just the two of them in the whole world. Maniye's opponent had adopted a counter stance, blade held high and jutting forwards, offhand low, halfway to reaching for Maniye's weapon. The girl had been learning these stances and moves for years. Her technique would always be better. If this was a dance, or the slow, measured steps of a lesson, then Maniye would always be stumbling to keep up. Some part of her mind had frozen. What comes next? Just as she sometimes found in practice. The animal inside her knew that she could not afford to be the one reacting, though. Even as Imshalma moved forwards, so Maniye's feet were already dancing. She passed backwards 3 quick steps, because over a short distance it was always possible to go backwards faster than the opponent could advance. That was lesson 1. Lesson 2 was when she braced against her back foot, pushing herself towards her opponent as Imshalma was trying to close the gap. In the moment after, she had reversed her motion, but before she was within reach of that bronze claw, she stepped. She managed the pounce badly, the dagger nipping at her across the foreleg, and her impact coming at an angle so that she made Imshalma stagger without knocking her down. Then she had leapt off, ending up on the far side of her opponent, knowing that, without that dagger pinned, she could not stay within its reach. They both stepped in the same instant, Imshalma to tiger, Maniye to girl, her blade sweeping so that it cut her opponent across the muzzle, sending the animal reeling away, pawing at the shallow wound. She felt her heart racing within her. For a moment, she was fighting against her own body, trying to settle back into her ready stance. If Imshalma had been able to break through her own pain to mount an attack, things could have gone badly. Instead, she was retreating again, now on human feet, and dabbing at a line of blood that traced the bridge of her nose and ran along one cheekbone. For a moment, Maniye thought that her opponent lacked the will to go on, but then some metal came into the other girl's eyes, and she was striding forwards, passing with the dagger, changing stances fluidly, all her years of practice flooding back into her. Maniye stepped back, retreating before the darting bronze that kept coming for her. Abruptly, her tiger eyes could not see a way past the blade. She tried a feint to give herself room, got her footing wrong, and took a raking scratch across her forearm. She was aware that she had been backing up for too long, that she might hit a wall at any moment. Something made Imshalma pause. It was Maniye's expression, all bared teeth and frustration and wolf features. In that moment, Maniye struck back, slapping for Imshalma's knife hand, letting her own blade find the lines that she had been taught. Belly, throat, armpit, flank. Imshalma fell back rapidly, and they both stepped at once, pushing forwards into a grappling embrace of tigers, a lightning exchange of claws that marked both of them. Then Imshalma had twisted aside, shrugging out of the clasp and stepping back to drag her blade past Maniye's eyes. It left a slight wound, a scalp wound, but the shock of it threw Maniye back into her human form, out of position and off balance. Imshalma had a hand bunched in the collar of her tunic, holding her down, with her dagger drawn back to thrust. Maniye stepped without conscious decision and got her teeth into the other girl's wrist. Had Imshalma held to her purpose, she could still have stabbed and ended it, but instead she jerked away with a yell. Instead of holding, as every instinct was howling at her to do, Maniye broke away and made a snarling, defiant retreat, blood in her jaws. her wolf jaws. She stepped to human instantly, standing in her best approximation of a ready stance, and Imshalma was still facing her, still nominally fighting, but the other girl's eyes were wide, the expression of someone whose fears have been made flesh, seeing the wolf brought to life right there in the temple. She found her balance, though, leveling her blade at Maniye once more, although there was a terror still lurking in her eyes. She would not back down. There was only Aritchaka's voice calling out, "Enough!" The priestess stood at the far end of the passage, the same direction the four girls had come from. Maniye felt sure she had been watching there for quite long enough. "Your dedication to your studies is admirable," Aritchaka said, in a sharp-edged voice. "However, I feel you both require more practice so as to master the proper forms. Have those injuries washed and tended to." "Please don't tell her," Maniye thought. "Please don't tell my mother." But the words could not be spoken, and Aritchaka's expression was stern. Following a day of practice in which she did not look at or speak to any of the other girls, and they had returned the same cold courtesy, Aritchaka came to her as she was bedding down. "Do not sleep. Tonight I will come for you," the priestess instructed. She was staring, weighing what she saw, but her face could not be read. "What is it?" Maniye wanted Hesprick there, because she dearly needed anyone who might be on her side. Although he was tolerated within the Shining Halls, his presence in the temple itself was very much on sufferance. He could not stay there long. She was alone. "The queen has sent for you," Aritchaka told her. "Tonight we feast with the tiger. It is for the priesthood and the great families, but she will have you there." She was unhappy about it. Maniye felt her own innards clench. What did this mean? Was Joalpey going to acknowledge her at last? Would the priesthood stand for it, if she did? Or was she herself to be offered to the tiger? Would it be her screams next, now the extended torment of the swiftback scout had finally been silenced? After that, there was nothing for it but to watch the moon climb the sky and put the stars to shame, to name the constellations as they made their procession above, and wonder if any of them might be invoked to come to her aid. Within her, her twin souls roiled in a festering sore of fight and flight, keyed up to a danger that she could not assess or confront. The foot-dragging stretch between dusk and midnight was a long and lonely road for her. And then at last she heard the soft scuff of Aritchaka's return. The priestess carried with her a robe of soft hide and a cloak of tiger fur, which lay heavy enough on Maniye's shoulders that she felt the tiger himself was pressing down on her. Meekly, mutely, she followed in the woman's footsteps into the heart of the temple, into that same room of smoke and shadow where the insubstantial spectre of the tiger dwelt. She had expected there might be other students, those in favor or disfavor, or perhaps the priesthood all mantled in tiger skin. But Aritchaka backed out again as soon as she had delivered Maniye there, and then it was just the two of them, the girl with the wolf tribe face, and the queen of the tiger people. Joalpey, whose secret name was Strength Under Moonlight, forced her head around to gaze directly at her daughter. The muscles of her jaw clenched, but this time she did not look away. Her eyes just lanced and lanced deeper, as though Maniye was a boil. "She knows," Maniye thought. Just one lapse into wolf shape, after resisting it for so long. But of course, word had come to her mother. "Is this to be a reckoning, then?" Maniye thought. Maniye felt the tiger cease his pacing and settle down in the darkness behind her, head resting on his paws, and watching. Something was to happen here. Her twin souls knew it. She could almost hear the great cat's rumbling purr of anticipation, feeling it like a tremor in the ground. Then there were servants, thralls, men with heavy collars bearing platters of meat. They looked at neither woman, merely trod about the chamber in fixed paths, eyes on their feet as if terrified of stepping away. "Sit with me," Joalpey instructed. "Many, many tracks, daughter, sit with me." She folded herself down alongside the altar, and, after a moment, Maniye followed her example. Aritchaka and the priesthood hold the tiger's feast, but the queen takes her meat apart from her subjects, Joalpey explained. She was watching Maniye as if the girl was venomous, or apt to become violently mad. But you shall eat with me, please. Maniye took a sliver of meat. It was so tender that it seemed to melt on her tongue, delicately spiced and rich with juices. She was suddenly aware of how hungry she was, having fasted since noon. Joalpey found a smile and forced it onto her face, picking at the flesh herself. They tell me you learn fast, devouring all they have to teach you, she observed. I want to be of the tiger, Maniye insisted. I will do anything if it means that. Joalpey regarded her doubtfully as the girl scooped up another slice of meat and tore into it. In this short time, they say you have made great advances. You cannot walk the steps of the tiger's dance, yet each footfall is not so very far away. You do not know all the cycles of our heroes and our deeds, yet you can tell a tale that is not so very far removed. And they say you step well. Her voice had gone hard on that word, but Manny could see that she was fighting down the bitter edge in it. Manny opened her mouth again, not sure what she should say next. She longed for Hesperic's wisdom, to know what convoluted sequence of words would break down the barrier still between them. Surely there had to be some magic that could accomplish it. The tiger's sacred meal, Joalpey gestured. How do you like it? Very well, Manny said, desperate to please, although it was true. You understand, then? The girl frowned. Understand? That you eat the flesh of the wolf. That was no great revelation. Amongst the winter runners, she had eaten wolf meat many times. It was common, when a hearth woman wished to become with child, that she would have her hunter mate kill a wolf and butcher its body for the pot. In that way, the beast's soul would be cut loose, and might seek out a new life within her belly. Usually, there was enough to spare, and it was good practice to woo the wolf's favor by gifting it to many. Still, the meat was tough and poor eating, not like the feast currently before her. This tastes like no wolf, she remarked, around a mouthful. This is tender as a pig. Joalpey regarded her intently. It is wolf. And this time Mani caught the special inflection, and a sudden shudder of fright went through her. With great willpower she forced the mouthful down, aware of sitting suddenly on a knife edge. Yes, the swift-backed scout, the wolf, had stopped screaming at last. She had not asked what would be done with him after that. But if he died? The words were drawn out of her as though she had eaten a keen-edged thread along with the meat, and now it was being hauled back out. Humans were animals. Animals were human. There was no line between them save the ability to step. Souls passed one to the other. To eat of a deer that had worn a man's shape was no different than to eat of a mute deer that had not. But Joalpey meant something different. His ghost, Manny got out, is here? Yes, the queen confirmed calmly, and selected another morsel herself. Manny sat very still, because this was a tiger thing. This was a tradition of her mother's house. This was how they did things in the Shining Halls. But it was wrong. It was terribly wrong. Not eating the flesh of a man, for all beasts were men, but to eat his soul. To trap it within the yoked human flesh and to consume it, to give a mad ghost sanctuary inside your own body, was to fill yourself too full of souls, and she had two already fighting within her. This is how the tiger is fed. He is a god. What do you think he eats? Other people do not understand this, but we know. And many thought, the Shadow Eaters, the wolves call us. It is not just a casual name. Her hands shook. She thought that she could feel the dead wolf's ghost squirming inside her. And yet, and yet, the tiger had padded up behind her, darkening the gloom further with its smoky presence, waiting to be fed. There were rituals that they had tried to teach her, words and forms and steps. Aware that Joalpey's eyes were fixed upon her fiercely, Maniye stood, trying to master the hammering of her heart. She took a deep breath and turned to face the tiger god. Her eyes saw only the dancing patterns of shadow that the fires threw against the wall, but her mind told her that these were the striped flanks of the tiger, that the hot air was his breath. The knowledge, the utter certainty that he was immediately before her came like a blow, as though that sightless muzzle had suddenly nudged at her chest, rocking her back on her heels. She could not remember all the moves, the gestures of invitation and propitiation, but she could guess and follow her instincts, just as Joalpey had. The sequence was not long, and if she did not get every motion of it exactly right, she was never far away, hovering about it like a crow over a dying thing. With a mix of grace and awkward pauses, she invited the tiger to feed, to take the struggling soul of the swiftback scout from between her lips. And she imagined that vast maw gaping for her. She wondered what else it might take from her. She felt her own wolf nature backing as far into her as it could go, tail between its legs, yellow eyes glinting. When she turned back, with the dark tide that was the tiger receding in her mind, Joalpey was standing there, close enough to touch. She was still staring, forcing herself to stare at the girl. One hand was raised halfway, as if to rest on Maniye's arm, but it had paused. For a moment, for a long, tense agony of a moment, she remained still, save that Maniye could hear her mother's ragged breathing. I want a daughter, the queen got out. I want an heir of my own blood. You are all the heirs of my blood, all that there will ever be. The outstretched hand twitched, contracting into a fist. But, 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 but I look on you and I see it in your eyes, in your face. You have a wolf soul. I have a tiger soul. Maniye's voice was just a whisper. It is not enough, Joalpey forced out through clenched teeth. Aritchaka has told you. Aritchaka! Joalpey hissed. Aritchaka has spoken for you. You are strong, she says. You are clever. You are brave. You are all the things a child of the tiger should be. But I see these things in you, too, and it is a wolf's strength, a wolf's cleverness. I cannot change my eyes. I cannot forget them. Stone River and that loathsome creature his priest, and you are them. They sit in your face, and I cannot see you past them. She took 2 steps away convulsively. The hand that had been reaching out was now warding. Maniye tried to voice something, a plea, a protest. What sound came out did not make a complete word. Then they will use you against me, her mother whispered. The tiger tells me so. The tiger tells me that you must be prey if you are not his. What am I to do? I want to make you mine, but I cannot. I cannot bear you to be here. I thought I could face it after all this time, but it still cuts me. It hurts just as it did. She turned away, fists clenched by her sides, shaking. Maniye felt the tiger's breath still on her neck, its insatiable hunger for souls. You must be prey if you are not his. She fled then, while Joalpey was still wrestling with herself. Any later would be too late. And that is the end of chapter 31. So, Maniye had a bit of a scrap with one of the other tiger girls, during which, in order to save herself, she stepped into her wolf form, which was quite the faux pas. They don't accept that too much in the tiger realm. She made a mistake. And because of that, she has been cast out by her own mother. And now it appears she is about to flee. So, let's see how that turns out for her. She put all this work into becoming a tiger, learning their steps, learning their rituals. Now she's taken off on the run again. So, Let's see what happens next in chapter 32. Shiri had been terrorizing the local wildlife, stepped into her plains form, a laughing girl indeed. The deer and squirrels and groundhogs and coyotes she scared up had no idea what she was. A long limbed, spotted demon with swift and terrible jaws, she killed more by fright than by trauma, Asmander reckoned. She killed more than they needed, too, but she was enjoying herself, and he had no intention of stopping her. It was a bitter realization, but of the three of them, she was the only effective hunter in this country. He disdained to sully his champion's shape for something as mundane as finding food, and neither old Crocodile nor the dragon could hunt in such cold. The year was supposedly getting warmer, but Asmander could only assume that in the crown of the world that word carried some other meaning. Come south to our country, Asmander had told the laughing girl. Come hunt the channels of the estuary or the banks of the Sotek's head, and then we'll see. But she just laughed at him, and she was right to do so. I will, she said, her grin widening from ear to ear as she made him gut and spit the spoils of her pre-dawn hunt. And I'll outdo you there, too. There is nowhere in the world my people cannot thrive. Then why do you rule just a hand's breadth of the plains, and no more? Where is the great empire of the hyena? Asmander demanded, nettled. She put her face right in front of his, eyes to his eyes. Oh, leaping champion, we are a patient people. We are not hasty. The plains are covered with the dust of those who have mouthed greatness and failed to keep a hold. We have seen the aurochs and the horn bearers. We have seen the cats come and go. We will see these northern wolves fall, and no doubt we will visit the ruins of your own great city one day. We will watch you all claw up for the sun, and then burn, and we laugh. And when you have all fallen, then we will walk the carrion road of your failure, and we will rule. And she had him. He was staring into those wide eyes, struck to the core with the certainty of it all, the manifest destiny of the laughing men and the women who led them. He could see, vividly in his mind's eye, their dominion of bones, extending from the cold north to the deserts beyond the Sotek. And then she laughed delightedly and pushed him away, so that, off balance from squatting on his haunches, he tumbled backwards. For a moment he was a crocodile, twisting and whipping his bladed tail at her, and then he regained his feet and his human shape. You made it up! He snarled at her. This is all your fantasy! Maybe it is, and maybe it isn't, she grinned fiercely. But you recognized it for truth, didn't you? I think you even liked it. A strong woman to put her foot on your neck, eh? Is that your type, oh champion? Venator snickered. There was no other word for it. Asmander glowered at the pair of them. Mock all you want. A champion is chosen by the world. It is something you will never know. A champion can't even get his servant to gut a rabbit for him, Shiri pointed out, not in the least put out. It's beneath him. Asmander looked down at his own slick hands and smiled somewhat shamefacedly. You're right. I should really take him in hand. Try it, Venator growled. They had been hiding out here in the woods near the shining halls for days now, in a shelter built of branches and leaves that had not been meant to last this long. Every so often, Hesperk appeared and assured them that all was well, but his business was not yet concluded. Questions about whether this wolf girl of his needed rescuing or not were dodged nimbly, and then he would be gone. That the locals were aware of them seemed inarguable. Yet nobody troubled them, nor invited them in within the halls of the settlement either. And that was a shame, for the shining halls looked as close to civilization as he had come in a long while. In the manner of their building and carving, Asmander saw an echo of his own homeland, and wondered what ancient architects had tracked north, or south. What's the point of him if he won't cook and clean for you? Sherry demanded. I'm not his mate, the old pirate spat. Are you not? Enough! Asmander stood up abruptly. He didn't know what had alerted him, but something was definitely wrong. The other two abandoned their quarrel instantly. Sherry stepped smoothly, surging forwards into her high-shouldered hyena shape. Venator took up his murette, the green stone edge of which he had been awake half the night sharpening. A moment later, Asmander spotted them, Hesprick returning, and this time not alone, for a small wolf girl dogged his footsteps. The sight filled him with gladness. It meant they could move again, and it meant he could now fulfill his own mission, one way or another. Hesprick had paused, struggling for breath. The girl addressed him briefly, and then she was a tiger, and the old priest a serpent coiling in her jaws. Seeing that, such trust between them, Asmander understood why the priest had demanded his reluctant entourage wait for him. He pushed further thoughts of his duty to the back of his mind. Then the striped cat had flowed up the hillside towards them, hardly seeming to need footholds. A second later, Hesprick was with them in human form, looking so worn out that Asmander felt he could have held the old priest up to the sun and viewed his bones through the man's skin. Is this her, then? He asked, lightly. Stepped back to her human shape, the much heralded girl seemed an insignificant piece of work. And now we go, Hesprick confirmed with uncharacteristic directness. Forgive me for ruining your breakfast. There are more rabbits, Shiri said happily. Always more rabbits. This is good hunting land. A shame, Hesprick remarked wryly, for we will be hunted. They set off as swiftly as possible, a stepped Shiri leading the way. Asmander had asked for the honor of bearing Hesprick, the priest's whip-slender form tucked inside his tunic, next to his bare skin. The girl changed, too, not to the tiger, but into the compact form of a wolf, but he had been expecting that. Asmander would have preferred to have the two coyote traders with them, because the north remained a large, cold, and complex place in which to navigate. However, Two Heads Talking and Quiet Wind Loud had abandoned their company as soon as they were close to the shining halls. The pair had shown little confidence in tiger hospitality. Even so, at first it was simply a matter of finding the best paths downhill through the trees, for it was more important to put distance between them and any pursuers than to be clever. As night drew on, then perhaps some application of cleverness might be in order, Asmander considered, and that was where they were more likely to run into trouble. Even a day out from their starting point, they would still be well within the tiger's shadow. And yet, as dusk fell, he was aware that all sign of civilization had been left behind, save for the odd tumbled ruin. There was no great sprawl of farms and herdsmen here, as there would have been in the south. Asmander sensed that they would be re-entering the domain of the wolf before too long, which brought its own special problems, he knew. Shiri sniffed out a sheltered hollow, and they all bundled themselves together to sleep, without a fire, but building a shelter around them that would hold their body warmth near to them. Even so, they were all awake and shivering well before dawn. Early start it is, then, Asmander declared, and he nodded at the wolf girl, Maniye, who had not said a word to anyone yet. What's she good for, then? Venator was more direct. She's what's this all about? Why? Because it is my whim and my will, Hesprick told him sharply. Venator, no proper follower of Serpent, glowered at him, but stopped short of any direct challenge. We are walking between fires, I am afraid, the old priest said gently to Maniye, and yet we must walk. Who is likely to be chasing us, and why? Asmander asked him, posing a question necessary enough not to seem invasive, although he was burning with curiosity.
All I know is that she came to me in the tiger shitty,
Hesprick told him.
and she needed to leave. That was enough.
You foresaw it, Asmander decided. The old man shook his head tiredly.
If only the serpent could speak so clearly to me. It seemed to me that life in the crown of the world is seldom kind, and that the life of one half-wolf girl has not been kind, and that such unkindnesses might not be shrugged away simply by exchanging one roof for another. And so I came to the shining halls and waited. And I wish that I had not been needed there, and could have returned to you alone. But sometimes the serpent moves in your innards, and you must learn to trust that movement and follow it.
What was it, though? Asmander asked, plaintively. Somewhere in the question lurked the southerner's civilized horror of these northern people and their ways. My mother! Maniye's voice sounded flat and dead. I found my mother! Looks were exchanged between the rest of them, and then,
The tiger did for her,
from Venator, Idiot! Her mother must be Tiger! Shiri hissed.
doesn't mean they can't.
Quiet! Asmander hissed at them both. Maniye stared at them. It was as though, after a day's travel together, she was seeing them for the first time. You are as I thought men of the far south would be, she remarked in a small voice, staring at them.
As I said, the followers of the serpent are special.
And Hesprick then named them all, though Asmander could see that the girl had problems with most of what she heard, traditions being so different in these lands. What was it about your mother? Asmander rested on his haunches beside her, so as not to loom. He wanted to know whether there was some rescue they would need to enact, or if the older woman was dead. Maniye took a deep breath. She did not want me, was what he barely heard, the words scarcely venturing beyond her teeth. She would not look on me. Faced with that, he could only stand up and back off. They achieved another day's hard journeying. At first, they followed the plains girl Shiri's best guess, and Maniye tried behind on her wolf feet, mostly so she would not have to speak to anyone. Past midday, though, she came out of herself enough to object to the path. Where are you even going? She demanded. Shiri regarded her narrowly. Away?
Where would you head for?
Hesprick asked her gently. They had stopped to eat in the shadow of a great fallen stele, a carven obelisk that might have even marked some key tiger tribe border. The further west we travel, the more the shadow of the wolf falls on us, she warned them simply.
These things are known. A stranger is always short of friends.
Hesprick said. Yet we may find some, she insisted. If we find the river and follow it, there are the horse traders. The old priest frowned.
But your people.
We would brave the wolf's jaws to do it, yes. She closed her eyes, breathing in the land around her. Winter runners or swift backs. If there were wolf scouts at the doors of the shining halls, then they will be everywhere south as well. We could run into them at any time, but more and more so the further south we tread.
Then what?
Asmander. Venator demanded, sounding as though running into a few enemies on the road would be just the thing for him. North, she said.
What is north?
Asmander asked for her.
Cold is what's north.
Put in Venator.
More cold even than this.
She looked at him blankly, because this was a warm spring, promising a fierce summer. Do you think loud thunder would help us, Hesbrook? The old serpent looked troubled.
The cave dweller we wintered with, yes, the man he now is, after his mother has taken him to task. That is a different man.
But
But these are quite the most hostile lands I have ever traveled,
he admitted, and then added,
yes, even including the plains, young laughing child. Your people have no monopoly on unpleasantness. So we will see if the bear will take in the tiger's quarry and the wolf's.
And then, messenger? Asmander demanded. The old man plainly knew what he meant, though he looked so weary at the thought that Many could feel the weight of his age dragging at her, too.
Then it will be time to look to the South's needs, champion, and whatever I can do, I will do.
They set out again, and this time Many, as wolf, led them. Shiri relinquished the vanguard with nothing more than a shrug of her shoulders. Her scent, when she stepped, was harsh and strange in Maniye's nose. Their path took them into broken ground, where the cover of the trees was patchy and unreliable. That was her error, she realized in retrospect. She was trying to find the shortest path, and thought this must also be the best. When the attack came, it was unheralded. Not a scent, not a sound until it was too late. She was running their little band across a rugged stretch of land creased deeply by the path of a stream that was still swelled by the late meltwater from the northern reaches of the highlands. The crossing was difficult, the waters high and fast and hungry, too much so to swim in any shape. Shiri and Venator were already across, and Asmander was just about to make the jump, with Hesperk slung inside his tunic. Then there was a rush of wind. She assumed it was just that at first, but it grew louder and louder far too swiftly. Abruptly, the sun was blotted from the sky by a vast shadow. The great bird struck, coursing at head height over the uneven land, angling its wings as it took her, its talons, hot and strong as metal from the forge, seizing her about the body. She had time for one shriek, more of surprise than of pain or fear. And she was airborne. There were other birds, lesser creatures circling overhead, but the vast winged eagle made them seem sparrows. It hoisted her into the air with ease, and the blustering beat of its feathers sent Asmander toppling from the stream's edge. She caught a wheeling glimpse of him kicking away from the rock, one arm out for the others to catch him, and then she was already too far from them, jolting and jostling in the air as the eagle shifted its grip on her. The points of its hooked claws snagged into her clothing and pierced through all her furs and hide to prick at her skin. In midair, she had tried striking out at the eagle, thinking that she might be able to hurt him, and so bring him down. At the first blow, though, he simply let go with one claw, leaving her dangling wildly from the other over what was now a fatal drop. The message was clear. She was not carried so very far, and she could feel the eagle beginning to labor, for all the great span of his wings. Could he have plucked up someone larger? Asmander or Shiri, perhaps? Venator? Surely not. But Maniye had always been small. Abruptly, the hard grip of those talons loosened, and she yelled out in terror before landing on hard rocks. The drop had just been a second's worth, and she had found she had taken her tiger shape, four legs cushioning the landing as best they could. For a moment she was snarling, swiping at those around her, full of fighting spirit. Then the eagle landed on her back, driving her savagely to the unyielding ground. She twisted and clawed at him, but his grip was horrifyingly strong. A second later, he had effortlessly shifted a claw to her neck, choking her, and she was again in her fragile human form beneath him. He keened and shrieked, deafeningly loud, and people nearby were hurrying forwards. Even as she gasped and gagged, a noose was about her neck, pulling tight, and then his wings boomed in the air, lifting him up and then dropping him down a handful of paces away. She reached for the noose instantly, but hands were laid on her, hauling her to her feet. There was an Erie on either side of her, twisting her arms back painfully, lean, hard men with half-painted faces. The eagle stretched its neck back and spread its wings, a gesture of triumph beyond mistaking, and became a man. Yellowclaw. Of course it was Yellowclaw. "What do you want?" she shouted at him. Surely it was enough that her mother's people and her father's would be hunting her, and that neither meant her well. What did this creature want with her? "Did she send you? Did the priesthood send you?"
Nobody sends Yellowclaw, the Erie leader scoffed. Yellowclaw is his own master. Yellowclaw is a champion, Many-Tracks Wolf Girl. Your people do not even know what that means.
He spoke the word as Hesprick had when referring to Asmander. There was something about the big Eriemen, and there had been a similar sense about the black southerner, although the general strangeness of the latter's appearance had taken more of her attention. They both cast greater shadows than other men, as though a greater spirit stood behind them. Yellowclaw's wings had taken them north to a high place, a stony shelf jutting high and sheer out of the trees, with the mountain slopes above. Here the Erie had carved out a roost for themselves within tiger lands. There were at least a dozen warriors in her sight, and a handful of women. The former were eyeing her with brash stares. The latter had eyes downcast, some cooking, some mending or making things. With a jolt, Maniye saw that each woman's hair was looped about her own neck like a halter. Nothing they could not have undone with a little effort, but a mark of slavery none the less.
As for what I want,
Yellowclaw muscled closer to her so that she could smell the raw flesh stink of him, feel the heat rising from his body.
I want you, girl, and so I have you. So it is with all that the Erie's gaze lights on.
He was glaring at her from his war eye.
I have the little mongrel girl that Stone River is hunting, and the queen of the tigers demands back. But I do not think I will give you to her, not yet. Not until I know what is so important about such a meager-looking morsel. And then I will decide whether you should return to our faithful allies, or whether I fly you to the Erie as my prize, or whether I cast you from the heights to see if the hawk will save you. I do not think that he would.
He cocked his head at some of the women.
Make sure that that collar stays on her, or you'll feel my talons, every one of you. She's a valuable cur, this one. For now, she is. Fleeting light, fly to the shining halls, see what they say about their missing mongrel. But don't take too long. You know how easily I grow bored. I might give this one the hawk's test.
He thrust his tattooed face into hers, close enough that she could have bitten him, had she dared.
Do you fly well, wolf girl? Tiger girl? Do you leave many tracks in the air? I didn't think so. Whatever god you speak to, ask him to make you useful to me.
And so concludes chapter 32 of The Tiger and the Wolf. So, Manny enjoys freedom for all of 2 pages, and then she gets plucked up by Yellowclaw, the champion of the Erie Men. And now she is cut off from her party, which seemed to be a pretty promising group. We had Hesprick and Asmander and Shiri and Venator all reunited, traveling through the woods, and then Manny gets cut off. So we'll have to tune in next week, read the next 2 chapters, and see what happens to Manny in her time spent among the Erie. So make sure to tune in again 1 week from now, and I look forward to seeing you then. Until then, enjoy your weekend. Bye now.